Let the words of my mouth and meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer.
Amen.
I was so proud the first time I wore my clergy collar in public. It was the day of my ordination to the diaconate. I remember getting out of my car in the parking lot at the cathedral in Maryland and spotting my friend who was also getting ordained that day, the two of us, and we both stepped out of our car, we both had our collars on, we both sort of pointed at each other and laughed. There was such joy in that, realizing that we were taking this new step in our lives. In fact, our current presiding bishop, Michael Curry, in those days was a priest in Baltimore, and he was the preacher at the ordination service. And it was this great event, and of course, Bishop Curry preached a sermon that was not for socks off. But it had been a long journey to get to that point. I had been on the ordination track for 6 years. Graduated from Yale Divinity School in '95, just a few months after Bishop Johnson of Massachusetts had committed suicide, which many of you may remember. The diocese at the time was understandably in turmoil. And Bishop Shaw suddenly became our diocesan bishop overnight. One of his first decisions was to put a hold on ordination in Massachusetts while things were sorted out. So there I was, my senior year of seminary, about to graduate, and limbo. Everyone in the ordination process at that time, including me, was in limbo. We couldn't get ordained. This went on for over a year. In the meantime, I moved to Baltimore, where my husband had started graduate work at Johns Hopkins, and I began serving at Church of the Redeemer, functioning in many ways as a priest, although I couldn't do communion and the priestly things, but I could do everything else, and I learned a lot in that process. But after a while, after a number of months, my rector understandably said, I really need you to be a priest. So he worked with the bishops of Maryland and Massachusetts, and I moved my credentials from Massachusetts to Maryland, where there wasn't a hold-up process, and they got me ordained in June of '96. That was when I was laughing with joy with my friend Chris in the parking lot. You see, the thing is, I am a deacon. All priests in the Episcopal Church are first ordained deacons. We're called transitional deacons and serve in that capacity for 6 months to a year before our second ordination to the priesthood. But we never lose our diaconal ordination. I am both a deacon and a priest. Holly, on the other hand, is a permanent deacon. She has a desire to be a priest and entered into the ordination process in order to be a deacon. Because you see, deacons have a very particular ministry that is different from priests. They are not just junior priests, second-class priests. They are their own thing. Holly does different things than I do, and she excels at what she does. Bishop Allen has designated today Diaconal Sunday, which is why Holly is not here with us. She is at a parish in Dedham, which doesn't have a deacon, to share with them what it is a deacon does. We all have the gift of knowing that most every Sunday. Some of the particular ministries that deacons have are to serve all people, particularly the poor, the weak, the sick, and the lonely. Deacons are often responsible for missions in a parish, helping the parish connect with those in need outside our walls so that we may serve them. At the same time, deacons are to interpret to the church the needs, concerns, and hopes of the world. That is why missions work also entails things like educating us about systemic racism and social justice. In other words, deacons are to encourage this movement both inward from the world, inward to educate the parish, as well as outward from the the parish to serve the world. There's really the link with the outside world and the parish congregation. In addition, deacons study scripture and they preach from time to time. Liturgically on Sunday mornings, they traditionally read the gospel, set the table for communion, and give the dismissal at the end of the service. In all things, deacons are to make Christ and his redemptive love known by word and example to those among whom they live and work and worship. Our reading for Acts today is about calling Stephen as the first deacon. This takes place in the time of the early church, and it's kind of a really little interesting window into the dynamics of what was going on in the early church. Jesus' disciples are trying to figure out how best to be a community and how best to proclaim this message of love and forgiveness. Earlier in Acts 4, we're told that the early church was very communal in nature. It says, "Now the whole group of those who believed were of one heart and soul, and no one claimed private ownership of any possessions, but everything they owned was held in common." So there's a very communal sense in the early church. Today's passage, 2 chapters later, actually continues with that theme, but makes a note. There's a little tension in this. The Hellenists complained against the Hebrews because their widows were being neglected in the daily distribution of food. So in other words, there's a little bit of ethnic tension going on in the Christian community. As they share their food in common, the poor widows from the Greek-speaking, Hellenistic Greek-speaking Jewish Christian diaspora were being neglected to the outsiders compared to the poor widows of the local Hebrew-speaking Jewish Christians. So something needed to be done to ensure that everyone had fair access to resources and that none were left out. The disciples were busy preaching and teaching. They understood that that was their ministry. So they gathered together and said, what are we going to do about this? And they hit upon the idea that they needed to create another category of leadership, one that was specifically devoted to service. And they elected Stephen as their first deacon. The word deacon in Greek means service. So some of their numbers switched their role. While many of the disciples continued their service of preaching and teaching, others adopted this new service of care for the poor. This is the origin of the category and role of deacons, creating two different types of service, two different categories of ministry. Manuel is incredibly lucky to have such a gifted deacon as Holly. She not only has a heart for mission work and service alongside many of you, but she also preaches, participates in Sunday worship, leads evening prayer, participates in pastoral care, and much more. But in truth, as Christians, we are all called to serve those in need. We are all called to follow Stephen's diaconal ministry to care for the poor. While we may not share our goods in common, we are our brother's keeper. We who have much are asked to share with those who have less. That it may involve sacrifices to ensure the care of others. But I'm constantly impressed that so many of you here already give your time, talent, and treasure, not only to Emmanuel, but to other groups and people in the community. This is the heart of the Christian life, the active heart. We are all